Hello and welcome back to the final video for the C1 Cybersecurity Posture Assessment. This video will cover questions 119 through 128. Does the district currently have an enterprise security architecture that is adequate to maintain information security within the district? Indicators may include high availability, redundancy in path, power, device, and quality of service. If your organization does not currently have an adequate enterprise security architecture, score 0. Score 1 if your organization has a partially adequate enterprise security architecture. Score 2 if your organization has an adequate enterprise security architecture for the most part. 3 if the organization has an almost completely adequate enterprise security architecture. Or 4 if the organization has optimal implementation of its enterprise security architecture. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Does the district have an emerging technology evaluation process that helps the district stay abreast of the continued evolution of security solutions and identifies ways that emerging technology can assist to deliver technology and information securely? Score 0 if your organization does not have an emerging technology evaluation process. Score 1 if your organization has an inconsistent or inadequate emerging technology evaluation process. Score 2 if your organization has a consistent but inadequate emerging technology evaluation process. 3 if your organization has a consistent and adequate emerging technology evaluation process. Or 4 if your organization has a consistent and optimal emerging technology evaluation process. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Does the district validate system and applications to assure that vulnerabilities are identified prior to implementation into production mode, i.e. end-user testing? While this question does relate to in-house developed apps, it is also pertinent to purchased systems and applications. Score 0 if your organization does not validate systems and applications to identify vulnerabilities prior to implementation. Score 1 if your organization makes a minimal effort to identify vulnerabilities prior to implementation. Score 2 if your organization makes a moderate effort to identify vulnerabilities prior to implementation. 3 if your organization makes a significant effort to identify vulnerabilities prior to implementation. Or 4 if your organization makes an exhaustive effort to identify vulnerabilities prior to implementation. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Does the district ensure that identified controls are implemented during the deployment of new systems to ensure the security of information and resources? Score 0 if your organization does not ensure that identified controls are implemented during deployment of new systems. Score 1 if your organization makes a minimal effort to implement identified controls during new system deployment. Score 2 if your organization makes a moderate effort to implement identified controls. 3 if your organization makes a significant effort to implement identified controls. Or 4 if your organization makes an exhaustive effort to implement identified controls during new system deployment. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Does the district have written procedures and guidelines governing the use of cryptography and key management in order to ensure that data is not disclosed or made inaccessible due to an inability to decrypt? Score 0 if your organization does not have procedures governing use of cryptography and key management. Score 1 if procedures are informal and undocumented. Score 2 if procedures have been formally developed but not fully documented. 3 if procedures have been formally developed and are fully documented. Or 4 if procedures are well thought out, optimized, and well documented. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Does the district require third-party providers, that would be contractors, organizations providing IT services, network monitoring, etc., to comply with all organizational security policies and standards? Score 0 if your organization does not require third-party providers to comply with all security policies and standards. Score 1 if your organization allows third-party providers to self-certify. Score 2 if your organization has an informal, undocumented, or ad hoc process. Score 3 if your organization has a documented process with a thorough review. Or 4 if your organization performs a formal review using a documented process and annually reviews multi-year contracts. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. For third-party providers, does the district establish roles and responsibilities with limits on access defined in accordance with least privileged and data minimization methodologies? Score 0 if your organization does not establish roles and responsibilities for third-party providers and does not limit their access. Score 1 if your organization provides broad access for third-party providers without regard to their actual need. Score 2 if your organization allows third-party providers to dictate their needs and access is given accordingly. Score 3 if you listen to third-party providers to understand their needs and apply access accordingly. Or 4 if you have intimate knowledge of the access needed by third-party providers through district research and understanding the scope of the third-party provider's duties and apply access accordingly. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Does the district monitor third-party providers' access to district systems and data to ensure that all access is in compliance with established access limits? Score 0 if your organization does not monitor third-party providers' access to district systems and data. Score 1 if your organization allows service providers to self-certify. Score 2 if your organization performs informal service provider compliance checks. 3 if it performs formal documented service provider compliance checks. Or 4 if it performs formal, documented, and continuous service provider compliance checks. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Does the district have an equipment lifecycle replacement plan structured to replace equipment on a continuing basis before it exceeds its useful life? This should include end-user equipment, network equipment, servers, uninterruptible power supplies, projectors, wireless access points, etc. Score 1 point if your organization has a lifecycle replacement plan that was developed based on equipment useful life, or 1/2 point if it falls short, or 0 points if your organization does not have a lifecycle replacement plan. Add 1/2 point if the plan covers some classes of equipment, or 1 point if it covers all classes of equipment. Add 1 point if lifecycle replacement plans are documented. And add 1 point if lifecycle replacements for all classes are fully budgeted every year, or 1/2 point if all classes are fully budgeted at least 4 out of every 5 years. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Does the district budget adequately support implementation of the equipment lifecycle replacement plan? Score 0 if lifecycle replacement is not part of the budget. Score 1 if your organization considers lifecycle replacement in the budget, but the allocation is grossly insufficient. Score 2 if the budget for lifecycle replacement is typically insufficient. 3 if the budget for lifecycle replacement is fully funded some years, but with no consistency. Or 4 if all lifecycle replacement budgets are fully funded every year. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. You're finished with questions 119 through 128, and you are now finished completing the Cybersecurity Posture Assessment. Please finalize your answers on your answer sheet and email the completed score sheet to jeff@c1fiber.com. Thank you very much, and we'll have the report back to you in 3 to 5 days.